August 18th, 1945. Okinawa, Japan. The late summer sun beat down upon the temporary American field hospital where the scent of antiseptic mingled with the salty ocean breeze. Medical Officer Lieutenant Thomas Reynolds wiped sweat from his brow as he finished treating another local civilian, his 20th that morning. 3 days after the official surrender announcement, Reynolds found himself still fighting, not against enemy forces, but against malnutrition, disease, and despair among the island's devastated population. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Lieutenant Reynolds could not possibly know on that sweltering afternoon was that his encounter with a widowed Japanese mother would challenge everything both believed about enemy and ally, culminating in an act of compassion that would echo across generations. Reynolds leaned against the makeshift examination table, stretching his back after hours of stooping over patients. At 32 years old, the former Chicago pediatrician had seen more suffering in 18 months of Pacific deployment than in all his previous years of practice combined. The 77th Infantry Division's Medical Corps had established this outpost specifically to treat Okinawan civilians, part of the American military government's efforts to stabilize the island after the brutal fighting had ended. "Lieutenant, got another one for you," called Sergeant Miller, pulling aside the canvas flap of the medical tent. "Woman, maybe 30, with a boy about 4 or 5. Both look half-starved." Reynolds nodded tiredly. "Send them in, Miller, and see if Tanaka can come translate. My Japanese is still terrible." The woman who entered moved with deliberate dignity despite her evident exhaustion. She wore a simple cotton kimono, patched in several places, and held tightly to the hand of a small boy whose eyes remained fixed on the ground. Reynolds noted immediately the hollow cheeks and thin limbs that spoke of prolonged malnutrition. The boy's legs showed the telltale signs of early rickets. "Good morning," Reynolds said in his limited Japanese. "I am Dr. Reynolds." The woman bowed slightly but said nothing. Her expression remained carefully neutral, though Reynolds could see the tension in her shoulders and the protective way she positioned herself slightly in front of her son. Corporal Hideo Tanaka, a Japanese-American interpreter from California, entered the tent and spoke rapidly to the woman in Japanese. Reynolds understood enough to catch the introductions. "This is Fumiko Takahashi and her son Akio," Tanaka explained to Reynolds. "Her husband was a fisherman who died during the conflict. They've been living in a cave on the eastern shore since their village was destroyed in April. She says the boy has not been eating for 3 days. Reynolds gestured to the examination table. "Please ask her if I may examine the child." After Tanaka translated, Fumiko hesitated, then whispered something to her son before lifting him onto the table. Reynolds approached slowly, aware of the fear his uniform might inspire. He had learned from previous patients that many Okinawan civilians had been told Americans would torture and kill them if captured. "Hello there, Akio," Reynolds said gently, speaking through Tanaka. "I'm just going to listen to your heart and look at your tummy. Is that okay?" The boy looked at his mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Reynolds proceeded with the examination, noting the extended abdomen typical of malnourishment, the dry lips, and the slightly yellowed eyes. What concerned him most, however, was the boy's complete silence and vacant stare. "Has he spoken at all recently?" Reynolds asked Fumiko via Tanaka. Fumiko's composed facade cracked slightly. "Not since we found his grandfather's body near our home 2 months ago," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He saw too much." Reynolds nodded, understanding all too well. He'd seen the same traumatized silence in children throughout the Pacific campaign, in the Philippines, in Guam, and now here in Okinawa. The physical wounds would heal faster than these invisible ones. "Your son has malnutrition and the beginnings of vitamin deficiency," Reynolds explained. "He needs proper food, clean water, and medical supervision for at least a few weeks." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Are you staying at one of the civilian camps?" When Tanaka translated, Fumiko shook her head. "We tried. There were too many people. Not enough food. Some men were. Not respectful to women alone." She straightened her shoulders. "We do better ourselves. Reynolds frowned. The refugee situation on Okinawa was indeed dire. With over 100,000 civilians displaced and infrastructure severely damaged, the hastily established camps were overcrowded and undersupplied. Reports of mistreatment had reached military government headquarters, though efforts were being made to improve conditions. "Wait here," Reynolds said suddenly, making a decision. He stepped outside the tent to find Sergeant Miller. "Miller, what's the status on those supply crates from the 29th General Hospital?" "Came in this morning, sir. Basic provisions, medical supplies, some clothing and blankets." "Good. And that empty storage tent near my quarters?" "Still vacant, sir. Were you planning to use it for something?" Reynolds nodded. "That just got allocated as temporary housing. Get a couple of cots in there, some blankets and a basic food package." Miller raised an eyebrow, but knew better than to question his commanding officer directly. "Yes, sir. For how many people?" "A woman and her young son. Medical necessity." Reynolds returned to the examination tent before Miller could ask further questions. Through Tanaka, Reynolds explained to Fumiko that he wanted to offer her and Akio temporary quarters near the medical facility, where the boy could receive regular treatment and proper nutrition. Fumiko's eyes widened with suspicion. "Why would you do this? We are not your people." Reynolds considered his answer carefully. "Because I'm a doctor first and a soldier second, and because I have a son too." When Tanaka translated this, something in Fumiko's expression shifted. Not quite trust, but perhaps a willingness to consider. "If we stay, what must we give in return?" she asked bluntly. Reynolds understood the implication and felt a surge of protective anger on her behalf. "Nothing. You would be under my medical protection." He paused, then added, "My wife died in 1941. Before I was deployed. My son lives with my sister in America. I understand what it means to protect your child alone." After Tanaka translated, Fumiko stood silently for nearly a minute, her hand resting protectively on Akio's shoulder. Reynolds waited, giving her the dignity of an unconstrained choice. "We will stay," she finally said, "until Akio is better." Reynolds nodded. "Thank you for trusting me that much." What began as emergency medical intervention soon evolved into an unexpected arrangement that defied the conventional boundaries of occupied and occupier. Reynolds converted the storage tent into a simple but clean living space for Fumiko and Akio, providing them with regular meals and medical care. To justify the arrangement to his superiors, he designated Fumiko as a local medical assistant, teaching her basic nursing skills that she learned with remarkable quickness. Captain James Howard, Reynolds' immediate superior, expressed concern when he first learned of the arrangement 2 days later. "You've set up a Japanese woman and her kid in private quarters?" Howard asked during their daily briefing. "That's highly irregular, Tom. The boy has severe malnutrition and trauma-induced mutism," Reynolds explained. "He needs consistent care and monitoring. The civilian camps are overcrowded, undersupplied, and frankly dangerous for a woman alone with a child." Howard sighed. "I understand your medical concerns, but this could look like favoritism. We've got 4,000 civilians in those camps." "Then let's improve the camps," Reynolds countered. "But until then, I'm not sending that boy back to a situation that will kill him. I've registered them properly, and she's working as a nursing assistant. Everything's by the book." Howard studied Reynolds for a moment. "This isn't Chicago, and you're not running your private practice anymore. There are protocols." "With respect, sir, the Geneva Convention and our own military guidelines mandate proper medical care for civilians in occupied territories. I'm following those protocols." Howard finally relented. "Fine. But keep it professional, and make sure everything's documented. Last thing we need is any suggestion of impropriety." "Understood, sir," Reynolds replied, bristling slightly at the implication. Over the following weeks, a cautious routine developed. Each morning, Fumiko would assist Reynolds at the medical tent, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of patient care that transcended the language barrier. Her presence had an unexpected benefit. Local Okinawan women, initially terrified of American medical personnel, became more willing to seek treatment when they saw one of their own working alongside the American doctor. Sergeant Miller observed this phenomenon one morning in early September as a line of women and children formed outside the medical tent. "Never seen so many civilians voluntarily coming in for treatment," he remarked to Reynolds. "They trust Mrs. Takahashi," Reynolds replied, watching as Fumiko gently coaxed a trembling elderly woman onto the examination table. "And that means they're starting to trust us too." "She's good with the patients," Miller agreed. "Reminds me of the nurses back home. Speaks pretty good English now too." This was true. Fumiko had begun learning English with remarkable speed, while Reynolds studied basic Japanese phrases. They developed a hybrid language of their own, supplemented by gestures and the occasional assistance from Corporal Tanaka. The most significant development, however, concerned young Akio. For the first 2 weeks, the boy remained almost completely silent, acknowledging questions with only the slightest nods or shakes of his head. Reynolds recognized the symptoms of psychological trauma and knew better than to rush the healing process. Instead, he took an indirect approach. Each evening, Reynolds would visit their quarters to check on Akio's physical recovery, bringing small gifts, a toy carved from wood, a picture book, or a chocolate ration. He would sit on the floor with the boy, demonstrating how to play simple games or reading stories in his halting Japanese while Fumiko translated. On the 17th day of their stay, as Reynolds demonstrated how to build a simple tower with scrap blocks of wood, Akio suddenly spoke. "Higher," the boy said quietly in Japanese, pointing to the tower. Fumiko gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Reynolds, recognizing the milestone but careful not to overreact, simply smiled and added another block. "Higher?" he asked in Japanese. "Higher," Akio confirmed, the faintest smile appearing on his face. That night, after Akio had fallen asleep, Fumiko stepped outside the tent where Reynolds was completing his daily reports. "Thank you," she said simply in English, for Akio's voice. Reynolds nodded, understanding the magnitude of her gratitude. He's a strong boy, like his mother. Fumiko regarded him curiously. "You said you have a son." "Yes, James. He's 7 now." Reynolds pulled a worn photograph from his pocket, showing a young boy with his father's eyes and a serious expression. "He's with my sister's family in Illinois." "You miss him," Fumiko observed. It wasn't a question. "Every day," Reynolds admitted. "I write letters every week, but mail service is irregular. The last letter I got was from 3 months ago." He hesitated before adding, "His mother, my wife Helen, died before I deployed. Tuberculosis." Fumiko nodded, understanding the weight of shared loss. Akio's father, Tadashi, was taken for the fishing fleet. Their boat never returned. She looked out toward the darkened ocean visible in the distance. Many boats never returned. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, two parents separated from the lives they had planned, finding unexpected common ground across the divide of war. By early October, Akio's physical condition had improved dramatically. The hollow cheeks had filled out, the rickets had begun to reverse with proper nutrition, and he had started to speak regularly, though still primarily to his mother. Reynolds had been teaching him simple English words, which the boy absorbed with the remarkable linguistic facility of childhood. The relationship between Reynolds and the Takahashis had evolved as well. What began as medical necessity had transformed into a genuine human connection, complicated by the realities of their situations, but no less meaningful for those complications. Reynolds found himself looking forward to their evening conversations after Akio had gone to sleep, when he and Fumiko would exchange stories of their previous lives and cautious hopes for the future. On October 12th, however, their tentative peace was disrupted. Reynolds was summoned to Captain Howard's office to find his superior looking unusually severe. "We've received orders for redeployment," Howard announced without preamble. "The 77th is moving to northern Japan as part of the occupation force. We ship out in 1 week." Reynolds felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What about our medical operations here?" "Being transferred to the permanent military government teams," Howard replied. "They'll continue civilian treatment, but on their own protocols." He fixed Reynolds with a significant look. "That includes any special arrangements you've made." Reynolds understood immediately. "Mrs. Takahashi and her son will need to be processed through regular channels," Howard finished firmly. "The temporary housing and employment arrangement ends when we deploy." "Sir, with respect, the boy's treatment isn't complete, and the civilian infrastructure here is still barely functional." Howard's expression softened slightly. "Tom, I understand you've developed a personal interest in their welfare, but we have orders, and the occupation is entering a new phase. The medical corpsmen staying behind will ensure they're properly situated." Reynolds knew further protest would be futile. "Yes, sir, I'll make the necessary arrangements." That evening, Reynolds faced the difficult task of explaining the situation to Fumiko. They sat outside her tent after Akio had fallen asleep, the October air carrying a slight chill that hinted at the changing season. "I am being transferred," Reynolds began, choosing his words carefully, "to northern Japan. My unit leaves in 1 week." Fumiko nodded slowly, her face composed in that careful mask he had come to recognize as her defense against difficult news. "I understand. We have taken advantage of your kindness for too long." "No," Reynolds said firmly. "That's not it at all. If it were my choice." He paused, uncertain how to express the complex emotions he was feeling. "You and Akio will be assigned housing in the civilian residential area. It's better organized now with proper rations and medical facilities." "We will be fine," Fumiko said with quiet dignity. "You have done more than anyone could expect." Reynolds looked out at the darkened camp, feeling the weight of imminent separation. "Akio will need to continue his treatments. I'll leave detailed instructions with the medical team." "I have learned much from watching you," Fumiko replied. "I will ensure he receives proper care." They sat in silence for several minutes, the unspoken hanging between them. Finally, Reynolds turned to face her directly. "Fumiko," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I want you to know that meeting you and Akio has been—" He struggled to find the right words. "It has reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place." Fumiko met his gaze steadily. "And you have shown me that there can be kindness even after so much cruelty." She hesitated before adding, "Akio will miss you greatly." "I'll miss him too," Reynolds admitted. "And you." The following days passed with a sense of impending loss. Reynolds continued his medical duties while making arrangements for Fumiko and Akio's transition to regular civilian status. He prepared extensive medical records for Akio, ensuring the continuing medical staff would understand the boy's needs. Akio, sensing the approaching change though not understanding its full implications, became increasingly attached to Reynolds, following him around the medical tent and asking to be taught new English words. Reynolds found himself treasuring these small interactions, knowing each might be among their last. 3 days before the scheduled deployment, Reynolds was completing paperwork in his quarters when there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Captain Howard. "Got a minute, Tom?" Howard asked. "Of course, sir. Come in." Howard declined the offer of a seat, instead standing somewhat awkwardly in the center of the small space. "I've been reviewing your recommendation for Mrs. Takahashi's placement." Reynolds tensed, prepared to defend his detailed housing and medical care requests. "Yes, sir. I believe those arrangements would best serve—" Howard held up a hand. "I've also received this." He passed Reynolds a folded paper bearing the letterhead of General Headquarters, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers. Reynolds scanned the document with growing surprise. It was an authorization for the employment of select Japanese nationals as civilian staff for American military personnel, particularly those with professional or technical skills. "I don't understand," Reynolds said, looking up at Howard. "New directive from MacArthur's office," Howard explained, "part of the occupation strategy. Building goodwill through employment and training opportunities for qualified locals." He paused. "I put Mrs. Takahashi's name forward as a qualified medical assistant." Reynolds was momentarily speechless. "Thank you, sir." Howard shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with the gratitude. "She's proven herself useful, and you've documented her training thoroughly. It's practical, not personal." He cleared his throat. "If she accepts the position, she and her son would be authorized to relocate with the unit to our new posting." "If she accepts," Reynolds repeated, his mind racing with implications. "That's right. It would have to be her choice." Howard moved toward the door. "You can present the option to her. Make sure she understands it's strictly a professional arrangement. After Howard left, Reynolds sat down heavily on his cot, the authorization paper still in his hand. The possibility of not having to say goodbye to Fumiko and Akio filled him with unexpected relief, but also uncertainty. Would Fumiko even want to continue this connection, to leave Okinawa for another part of Japan? And what exactly was he hoping for in offering this option? That evening, after Akio had gone to sleep, Reynolds explained the new development to Fumiko. They walked slowly along the perimeter of the camp, speaking in low voices. "It would be a proper position," Reynolds emphasized. "With regular pay and official housing for you and Akio, your medical skills are genuinely needed." Fumiko listened carefully, her face thoughtful in the moonlight. "And we would go to this new place, Sendai?" "Yes. It's a larger city, less damaged by the conflict. There would be better schools for Akio when he's ready." Reynolds hesitated. "But I understand if you prefer to stay in Okinawa. This is your home." Fumiko was quiet for several moments. "Okinawa was our home. But what remains of it now?" She gestured toward the devastated landscape beyond the camp. "Our village is gone. Our family is gone. Here, we are just two more displaced people." "You don't have to decide immediately," Reynolds assured her. "Take time to consider." "What would happen to us there?" she asked directly. In truth, not in official papers. Reynolds understood she was asking about more than just employment conditions. "I cannot predict everything," he answered honestly. "There will be difficulties. Some people, both American and Japanese, will not approve, but I can promise that Akio will continue to receive medical care, and you will have work that respects your abilities." He paused before adding, "And you would not be alone." Fumiko stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Why are you doing this, Thomas?" she asked, using his given name for the first time. Reynolds considered the question carefully, knowing the importance of complete honesty in this moment. "When I first offered you and Akio shelter, it was because I saw a child who needed help and a mother trying to protect him. It was what any doctor should do." He took a deep breath. "But now I'm offering because I've come to care about what happens to both of you. More than I expected to, more than might be wise." Fumiko nodded slowly, accepting his words without immediate response. They resumed walking, the silence between them neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but thoughtful. The following morning, as Reynolds was examining a young patient, Fumiko approached him with Akio by her side. "We will accept the position," she said simply. "We will go to Sendai." Reynolds felt a surge of relief and something deeper he wasn't prepared to name. "You're certain?" Fumiko nodded. "Akio and I discussed it." She looked down at her son, who was watching Reynolds with those serious eyes that had seen too much for his young age. "We believe it is best for our future." Akio tugged at Reynolds' sleeve. "Dr. Tom," he said in his carefully practiced English, "we go together?" Reynolds knelt to the boy's level. "Yes, Akio, we go together." The boy's face brightened with the first full smile Reynolds had ever seen from him. The journey to Sendai in early November brought new challenges. Despite Captain Howard's authorization, there were bureaucratic obstacles and disapproving glances from some of Reynolds' fellow officers. Fumiko faced even more difficult adjustments, navigating the complex social position of a Japanese woman employed by the occupying forces. Yet through these challenges, the bond between them continued to strengthen, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to Akio's well-being. Upon arrival in Sendai, Reynolds secured a small house near the military hospital where he was stationed. Officially, Fumiko and Akio occupied separate quarters as required by regulations, but in practice they spent most of their time together, forming an unconventional family unit that defied easy categorization. By December, Akio was attending a local school established for Japanese children, while Fumiko worked as a nursing assistant at the military hospital. Her skills earned the grudging respect of American medical personnel, particularly after an incident when her quick translation saved a misdiagnosis of a local patient. On Christmas Eve 1945, Reynolds returned home to find Fumiko and Akio waiting with a small surprise. They had prepared an American-style Christmas dinner using their combined rations and Fumiko's creative cooking skills. "Merry Christmas!" Akio announced proudly in English when Reynolds entered. Reynolds stared at the modest but thoughtfully arranged table, momentarily speechless. "How did you know how to do all this?" "I asked the other nurses about American traditions," Fumiko explained with a slight smile. "And we wanted to thank you." That evening, as they shared their meal, Reynolds presented them with gifts: a new coat for Fumiko and a toy truck for Akio that he had commissioned from a local craftsman. In return, Fumiko gave him a hand-bound book of Japanese phrases she had written out phonetically to help his continuing language studies. As Akio played contentedly with his truck, Reynolds and Fumiko sat beside the small heating stove, watching the boy's absorption in his new treasure. "I received a letter from my sister today," Reynolds said quietly. "She says James asks about when I'm coming home." Fumiko nodded, understanding the complex emotions behind his words. "It has been a long time since you have seen him." "Almost 2 years now." Reynolds hesitated. "My deployment was supposed to end in March, but with the occupation duties it's been extended indefinitely." A shadow of concern crossed Fumiko's face, though she tried to hide it. "You must miss your home very much." "I do," Reynolds admitted. "But I've been thinking." He paused, gathering his courage. "James needs a mother, and you and Akio need security for your future." Fumiko looked at him questioningly. Reynolds took a deep breath. "I need a mother for my son, and you need a home," he said simply. "Perhaps we could help each other." Understanding dawned in Fumiko's eyes. "You are proposing marriage," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Reynolds confirmed. "Not right away. There would be many complications to work through. But eventually, when it becomes possible." Fumiko was silent for a long moment, watching Akio playing on the floor. "What would this mean for our sons?" "They would be brothers," Reynolds said. "James would have a new mother, and Akio would have a father. We would be a family. Unusual, perhaps, but a family nonetheless." "People would not approve," Fumiko said softly. "Neither your people nor mine." "Some wouldn't," Reynolds agreed. "But that is changing. There are new laws being considered that would make it possible." He reached tentatively for her hand. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, just for you to consider that there might be a future where we don't have to say goodbye." Fumiko didn't withdraw her hand from his. "I will consider it," she said simply. Reynolds nodded, understanding that for now, this tentative acceptance of possibility was enough. In the years that followed, their path was far from smooth. Legal barriers, social disapproval, and the complex politics of occupation created obstacles that would have defeated a less determined pair. It was not until 1952, with the end of the Allied occupation of Japan, that Thomas Reynolds and Fumiko Takahashi were finally able to marry legally. By then, James had joined them in Japan, forming an unlikely brotherhood with Akio that transcended language and cultural differences. When the Reynolds family eventually returned to America in 1954, they faced new challenges of integration and acceptance, but they faced them together. Through it all, Thomas and Fumiko never forgot that their unlikely union had begun with the simple recognition of shared humanity amid the devastation of war. A doctor seeing past enemy lines to help a mother and child in need, and a widow finding the courage to trust where trust seemed impossible. Their story would become one of many such connections formed during the occupation, quiet revolutions in human understanding that helped transform former enemies into allies, building bridges of empathy that would ultimately prove stronger than the forces that had divided them. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.